I was in the middle of training a few rookie SWAT officers on proper building breach techniques when my phone buzzed on my hip. It was just a routine alert from my home security system, which, after years in law enforcement, I'd set up to catch porch pirates in the act. But this time, when I tapped the live feed, I nearly dropped my rubber training knife. There was a flashlight beam sweeping across my living room wall. Someone was inside my house. Initially, I thought it might be a burglar. But then the camera adjusted, revealing a middle-aged man in cargo pants and a vest labeled Community Patrol, sneaking past my bookshelf like he was on a mission to raid Bin Laden's compound. 2 other people were with him, one wearing a fishing hat, the other with a walkie-talkie clipped to her fanny pack. My stomach twisted, not out of fear, but from sheer disbelief. It was Karen's fake security patrol. They had just broken into the wrong damn house. Let me rewind a little. About 2 weeks before this home invasion disguised as a neighborhood safety sweep, I'd moved into a quiet suburb. My name's Luke, and I've been training SWAT teams, federal agents, and elite security forces for over 15 years. After years of fieldwork, I shifted gears to consulting and training. I wanted peace, a quiet place to raise my dogs and not worry about flashbangs at 2 a.m. The neighborhood was the typical suburban dream: picket fences, HOA newsletters about acceptable hedge heights and paint colors, the usual. The neighbors were friendly enough, except for one, Karen. No last name needed. Karen was your classic HOA dictator, wrapped in a pastel cardigan with a permanent scowl. She wore a laminated badge labeled HOA chairwoman and carried a whistle she'd blow whenever there was a dispute over garbage cans. The kind of delusions of grandeur usually reserved for warlords. Her latest obsession? Forming a civilian community safety task force. She claimed crime was on the rise. Crime. A neighbor once left their trash bins out a day too long, but in Karen's mind, the cul-de-sac had become Gotham City, so she decided to take action. She went full throttle, recruiting volunteers like she was assembling the Avengers of passive aggression. She printed uniforms, khaki shirts with Velcro name patches that read Neighborhood Safety Enforcer, and handed out clipboards for people to record suspicious activity. This included everything from blinking porch lights to houses with tinted windows. You can probably guess which house was at the top of her list. I kept to myself. I trained officers in my backyard. Nothing extreme, just non-lethal exercises, tactical theory, and physical fitness, above board and legal. But to Karen, my blackout blinds, motion sensors, and locked storage unit made me look like a criminal. When I told her I worked in law enforcement, she scoffed. "So, you're like a security guard then?" I didn't bother correcting her. It wasn't worth it. Then came the first warning, a pink slip taped to my door. It read, "Notification of voluntary safety inspection request," voluntary in quotes. It also stated that if I refused, the Community Safety Task Force reserved the right to escalate the situation for the safety of the neighborhood. I rolled my eyes, crumpled it, and threw it away. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The night before the break-in, I caught Karen and 2 of her goons measuring the length of my driveway with a tape measure. I stepped outside to ask what they were doing, and Karen smiled at me, like she was a villain in a Disney movie. "Just checking setbacks," she said. "Some of us are trying to keep the neighborhood safe. You never know what's going on behind closed blinds." I told her to leave my property. She pretended not to hear me. And now we arrive at the moment everything exploded. When I saw the intruders in my living room, I didn't panic. I stayed calm, calculating how long it would take me to get home. Could I intercept them before they left? Were they armed with anything dangerous, like pepper spray or a taser? One of them, Karen's son Kyle, thought of himself as military adjacent after too many hours of Call of Duty. He was the type to do something reckless. I dismissed the recruits and told them training was cut short for a real-world case study. I jumped in my truck, hit the silent alarm app, and sped toward home. On the way, I called the police to report trespassers in my house, keeping my identity quiet for now. I wanted clean optics, and I wanted Karen to step in it so hard that she'd be pulling HOA contracts out of her teeth for months. I reached my house in 6 minutes. I parked down the street, approached silently through the backyard, and entered through the garage. By the time I was inside, Karen and her team were arguing in my kitchen about whether they had the authority to open a locked shed. One of them was holding a set of bolt cutters. That's when I made my move. I flicked the breaker and killed the lights. They screamed from the darkness. I calmly called out, like I was giving instructions during a drill. You are trespassing on private property. Put down your tools, exit the premises, and lie on the ground. This is your only warning. Karen shrieked something about being authorized personnel, and Kyle lunged toward the hallway. I flipped the hallway strobe light on, part of a training rig, and Kyle ran straight into the wall at full speed, crumpling like a folding chair. The others scrambled for the door, but I was already there, flashlight blinding their faces and instructing them one by one to get on the ground. Karen stood her ground for about 5 seconds. I know my rights, she barked, pointing a finger at me. Yes, you do, I said, my tone calm but razor sharp. And you violated most of them tonight. She finally dropped the bolt cutters. 10 minutes later, the real cops arrived. I handed them my ID, explained the situation, and showed them the footage. The officers who recognized me barely held back laughter. Karen tried to explain that she was investigating a potential domestic operation under the authority of the HOA security clause. The officer turned to Karen, then back to me. Did you give her permission to enter your house? He asked. I shook my head. Karen was stunned silent. And just like that, her ridiculous empire of plastic badges and clipboards started to crumble. But that was just the beginning. By the time the red and blue lights painted my driveway, Karen was pacing like a wet cat, still clutching her clipboard like it would magically justify her actions. Her son Kyle was groaning on the floor, where he'd crashed into the wall. One shoe was missing, and his belt was twisted sideways. The other two, Janet and Ron, sat on the couch, staring blankly like they were trying to dissociate from reality. You could almost see the exact moment they realized, oh no, this wasn't just an awkward HOA moment. This was a felony. The first officer to step out of the cruiser was Lieutenant Marquez, a man I'd trained 3 years ago in advanced tactical response. He gave me a subtle nod as he approached but kept his expression professionally blank. Karen, not sensing the shift in energy, stormed up to him with all the righteous indignation of a woman whose coupon had expired. Officer, she barked, I'm so glad you're here. We've apprehended a highly suspicious individual. He was hiding behind blackout curtains and training people in his backyard. He has an entire shed full of, who knows. And when we came to investigate for the safety of the neighborhood, he ambushed us. You need to arrest him immediately. Marquez blinked once, then turned to me. I didn't say anything. I just held up my phone and pressed play. The footage of Karen's voice echoed from the speaker, clear as day, cut the lock. I don't care if it's illegal. He's probably building bombs in there. The silence that followed was glorious, the kind of silence you only get when someone realizes they've been caught, not just with their hand in the cookie jar, but with crumbs all over their shirt and the jar labeled evidence. Marquez folded his arms and said, so let me get this straight. You and your volunteers forced entry into a private residence without a warrant, consent, or emergency justification. Karen's response was a mix of sputters and stuttering. It was an HOA-sanctioned wellness check, she said finally. Karen, I said, my tone calm but cutting, you picked the lock on my side gate, disabled one of my cameras with a broom handle, and entered my house with tools and weapons. That's not a wellness check. That's burglary. Kyle muttered something from the floor, something about not meaning to do it. Janet started crying quietly, and Ron pretended to be asleep. Karen's knuckles whitened around her clipboard, as if sheer grip strength would reverse what she had done. Marquez sighed and reached for his radio. We're going to need backup at this address. 3 trespassers, potentially armed, 1 injured. House clear. Homeowner on site. Karen exploded. This is a misunderstanding. This is harassment. You're taking his side because he trained you. Marquez turned to her, and all professionalism was gone from his voice. No, I'm taking his side because I just watched a 10-minute video of you breaking into someone's house with a bolt cutter and a flashlight. If this were anyone else's home, you'd already be in handcuffs. Karen shut up at long last. When the second patrol car arrived, things became real for everyone. The officers were polite, professional, but firm. Kyle was checked out by paramedics and placed in the back of a cruiser with a bag of ice on his forehead. Janet and Ron were separated for statements. Karen stood rigid, refusing to answer questions unless they were legally mandatory, like someone who had watched half of a courtroom drama and thought she knew the law. As the officers processed everything, I stood by the front door, watching the neighborhood come alive. Curtains moved, doors opened, and people started gathering like it was a block party. Mrs. Chambers, across the street, leaned over her porch rail with a martini glass in hand, mouthing, "What the hell happened?" I shrugged. She grinned. I knew there was something shady about her. One of the officers came back to me with a clipboard filled with incident reports. "We're filing charges for unlawful entry and possession of prohibited self-defense weapons," he said. "Do you want to press charges yourself, or let the city handle it?" I thought for a moment. It would have been easy to just say yes, but I knew Karen would dig herself into a deeper hole if left to her own devices. "Let the city handle it," I responded. "I'll add my piece if she tries anything again." The officer nodded in approval. "Good call. I'm guessing this won't be the last time she pulls something. I'd bet my shed on it." Karen was escorted out, no handcuffs yet, but with a stern warning not to set foot on my property again. Her face twisted in a mix of rage and humiliation, the kind that makes you wonder how someone can convince themselves they're the hero in a story when they've just been caught breaking into someone's house like a cartoon villain, badge forged, no self-awareness. As the last cruiser pulled away, a few of the neighbors cautiously approached. "What happened?" someone asked. "Karen's security team broke into my house." "Wait, actually broke in?" "Yeah, caught them in the act. The whole thing's on tape." A few jaws dropped, someone even laughed. Mrs. Chambers muttered, "About damn time." I went back inside, closed the door, and exhaled. The house was a bit out of order, nothing major, but enough to leave a bad taste in my mouth. They'd opened drawers, checked behind furniture, even opened the dog food container. What did they think? I had a meth lab behind the spice rack. I spent the rest of the night cleaning up, reviewing footage, and labeling files for police and legal follow-up. One thing was clear, Karen wasn't just annoying. She was dangerous, delusional, and worst of all, she had just enough influence to convince others to follow her into her madness. I paused the video. Karen stood in my living room, flashlight drawn, eyes wide, as if she were clearing out a terrorist hideout. The irony? She had no idea who she was dealing with. I'd trained real tactical teams. I'd advised law enforcement on how to conduct lawful searches. Karen was playing dress-up in a neighborhood where the worst crime was someone's dog pooping on the wrong lawn. But now, it was personal. She hadn't just broken the law. She had broken my trust. And that was when I decided this wouldn't be just another police report. Karen needed to be held accountable in a way that left no room for escape. I was done sitting back. It was time to show her what a real response looked like, not with violence, not with chaos, but with strategy, precision, and the same tactical discipline I'd spent my whole career teaching others. Karen thought she was the sheriff of this town. She was about to find out what happens when the real trainers step in. The fallout from Karen's little raid came faster than I expected. Less than 24 hours after her community patrol was caught breaking into my house, the story spread like wildfire across our neighborhood group chat. Someone, probably one of the teens who filmed the police cruisers outside, posted a blurry video of Karen being escorted by officers. The caption read, "Karen's cops arrested for breaking into SWAT guy's house. You can't make this up." Suddenly, the woman who'd spent years terrorizing residents over mailbox colors and unapproved rose bushes found herself squarely in the community's crosshairs. The group chat exploded. People who'd never spoken up before suddenly shared stories. Mr. Lin from 2 blocks over commented that Karen had once accused his 12-year-old daughter of espionage for using binoculars during a science project. A single mom from Cedar Lane said Karen's patrol had followed her teenage son home just because he wore a hoodie. Someone named Teresa even had a file on Karen's handwritten warnings about fines for suspicious composting. These weren't minor infractions. These were obsession-level stalker notes. As the stories piled in, something else happened. People stopped being afraid of Karen. For 4 years, she had ruled with intimidation and technicalities, always hiding behind bylaws and a facade of neighborhood improvement. But once the illusion of authority shattered, everyone saw her for what she really was, just another entitled person with too much time on her hands, too little power, and a dangerously delusional sense of importance. The next morning, I was sipping coffee on my front porch when a sleek, black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb. I knew who it was even before the passenger door opened. My buddy Evan stepped out, suit pressed, badge clipped to his belt. We'd worked together in the past, he'd gone federal, while I shifted into training and tactical consulting. He grinned like he'd just heard the juiciest story of the month. "You always knew how to throw a party," he said. I nodded toward the house. "Want to see the footage?" I made popcorn. He didn't need to. He'd already seen it. Evan and I went over everything, what they touched, what they took photos of, even the audio files from the inside cams. But he wasn't just interested in the break-in. He wanted to know how Karen had organized the whole operation. When I showed him the HOA email she'd sent, outlining her emergency safety procedures and a list of high-risk homes, which included mine, a retired firefighter, and a nurse with 2 toddlers, Evan's face went from amused to stone-cold serious. "This isn't just a breach," he said. "This could be coordinated harassment and unlawful surveillance, especially if she used HOA dues to fund this." That's when I pulled out the bombshell. The Community Safety Task Force's intel log. Karen's team had left behind a cheap binder filled with notes and photos, of my house and others. It wasn't just surveillance, it was illegal surveillance. Evan flipped through it slowly, letting the weight of what he was seeing sink in. If this was a private investigator without a license, that's a legal violation. And if she involved any public officials? She's toast. I finished for him. That afternoon, I sent an anonymous tip and a copy of the footage to a local news blog known for covering neighborhood drama. They ran the story under the headline, "HOA Hero or Power-Hungry Trespasser. Suburban Karen Leads Illegal Raid on SWAT Trainer's Home." Within hours, it went viral on Reddit, especially in r/entitled people. Thousands of upvotes, hundreds of comments, everything from, "This feels like a sitcom episode," to, "Why hasn't this woman been arrested yet?" Someone even made a meme of Karen in aviators, labeled, "Commandant of the cul-de-sac." Back at home, the HOA board held an emergency Zoom meeting to deal with the backlash. They tried to keep it private, but of course, someone leaked the link. I tuned in just in time to hear Karen's panicked attempt to save herself. She claimed everything was a misunderstanding, that she never entered my home, and that the entire thing had been doctored to frame her. But the board wasn't buying it, not when the footage clearly showed her barking orders like she was leading a military raid on a cardboard drug den. It got worse for her. A few board members resigned in disgust, furious she'd dragged them into what was now shaping up to be a class action lawsuit. One woman, a quiet librarian named Darlene, took off her reading glasses mid-meeting and said, "I supported you when you wanted to ban wind chimes, but this is insane." Karen tried to speak again, but her internet conveniently froze, maybe she unplugged the router out of sheer embarrassment. The next morning, a formal investigation was launched into the HOA's use of funds and authority. 2 plainclothes investigators visited Karen's house. She tried to act normal, waving at them from her porch, as though she wasn't being scrutinized for multiple counts of trespassing, harassment, and potentially misappropriating HOA funds to print tactical patches and fake credentials. Even better, one of the investigators was a former student of mine. I didn't have to lift a finger. As all of this unfolded, something strange happened. People started coming to me in person, neighbors who'd never so much as waved before. They brought cookies, asked about security upgrades, and thanked me for finally putting Karen in her place. One elderly man, Mr. Watson, even said, "I can finally go out and garden without worrying about whether my gnome violates some ordinance." I kept a low profile, not wanting to become a neighborhood hero, but I did want accountability. When one of the former board members handed me a USB drive with every HOA meeting transcript from the past 2 years, including off-the-record notes about monitoring the behavior of non-compliant residents, I knew Karen's reign was finally circling the drain. But I wasn't done yet. With Evan's help, I drafted a formal complaint to the city council and the district attorney, not just about the break-in but about Karen's entire operation, the fake patrol, the unauthorized surveillance, the misuse of community power. It was time to take her off the board, out of the HOA, and maybe even into a courtroom. Karen had crossed the line. Now she was about to learn what happens when the guy she tried to frame for suspicious activity had trained half the officers in the county and kept every receipt. You could feel it in the air. The mood in the neighborhood had shifted, like the pressure drop before a storm. The silence that usually enveloped the mornings was broken by murmurs on every porch, whispered speculation in driveways, lawn chairs pulled closer to sidewalks, as neighbors openly discussed what they had only grumbled about in private. Karen was no longer just an annoyance. She was a scandal. The once untouchable queen of the HOA had become a punchline. And it was spreading faster than dandelions in spring. I kept it low-key, but I was watching and listening. People were organizing. It started with a quiet, unsigned flyer on every doorstep: "Emergency HOA vote this Sunday for our safety, our rights, and our sanity." No one claimed credit, but I knew who was behind it: Judith Langley, a retired Navy JAG officer, grandmother of 5, and the only person in the neighborhood who knew how to get things done. There was a time when I once stared Karen down over a simple driveway dispute, forcing her to back off without so much as raising my voice. If there was anyone I trusted to restore order with precision and no tolerance for nonsense, it was Judith. The emergency meeting took place at the community clubhouse, a place that hadn't seen such a crowd since the infamous Halloween potluck where someone spiked the cider, and half the neighborhood ended up belting out Bohemian Rhapsody in a karaoke showdown. This time, though, it was standing room only, with the air thick with tension as everyone awaited Karen's arrival and her inevitable attempt to reclaim control. As expected, Karen made her entrance in style. She rolled in with 2 teenage boys, both dressed in matching polos labeled HO Patrol Recon Unit, wearing mirrored sunglasses that looked completely out of place under the fluorescent lights. The boys looked as if they'd been promised a few leftover Halloween candies in exchange for their participation. Karen followed behind them, chin high, clipboard in hand, looking as though she were about to deliver a State of the Union address, rather than answer for breaking and entering. There was no applause. No boos. It was worse than that. The room just fell silent, with everyone staring at her. Karen grabbed the mic and immediately attempted damage control. She called the break-in at my house a training miscommunication, claiming that I had invited them, yes, invited them, for a joint security exercise. According to her, the footage was all a fabrication by malicious digital actors. She actually used the term digital actors, as if I had hired a team of CG specialists to create a fake video of her shouting, "Cut the lock," while holding bolt cutters. That was my cue. Without saying a word, I stepped forward, holding a flash drive and handed it over to Judith, who was presiding over the meeting like a no-nonsense judge in a military tribunal. Judith plugged the drive into the projector, and the footage began playing for all to see. Karen's voice rang out through the room, directing her squad to breach my door and search my living room for evidence of suspicious activity. There was a moment where Kyle crashed into the wall, which got a chuckle from the crowd. The part where Karen ordered Ron to check the cabinet for bomb supplies made everyone gasp. Meanwhile, Karen stood frozen, her smile looking more like a grimace, as if it were surgically stapled to her face. Her teenage patrol started slowly inching toward the exit. Judith paused the video and turned to Karen with one simple, pointed question: "Do you deny that this is you?" Karen stammered, blaming the lighting, the angle of the camera, and claiming her voice had been manipulated. The more she spoke, the quieter the room became. Her face turned an even deeper shade of red. Then, from the back, someone spoke up. It was Mr. Adler, a former police officer who had largely stayed out of the spotlight regarding Karen's antics. "I ran the audio through my department's forensic software," he said, holding up a small folder. "It's authentic. Not edited, not manipulated. This is real. This is criminal trespassing, unlawful surveillance, and attempted coercion under the guise of HOA authority." There was no coming back from that. A motion was quickly made to remove Karen as HOA chair. It was seconded, voted on, and passed without any hesitation. The next motion was to disband the so-called Community Safety Task Force and prevent any similar organization from forming without formal city approval. That, too, passed with overwhelming support. Karen stood there, motionless, clutching her clipboard as if it could somehow lift her out of the room. But this wasn't her ship anymore. She was sinking fast. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. But Karen wasn't done embarrassing herself just yet. The next day, she held a press conference on her front lawn. She taped printer paper to a music stand, pulled out a megaphone, and started addressing three confused neighbors, a dog, and a mailman who, seeing the situation, turned right around and walked away. Karen declared herself a victim of tactical bullying, and claimed that her efforts to bring order and protection to the neighborhood had been sabotaged by shadow forces. I watched from my porch, coffee in hand, thoroughly entertained. Later that week, I received an official letter from the city. Thanks to the footage, testimonies, and the mounting number of complaints, they were initiating a legal review of Karen's actions under local laws governing HOA conduct, impersonation of authority, and the misuse of community funds. She was facing fines, a potential court date, and if found guilty, a permanent ban from holding any HOA office in the state. The best moment came that weekend, though. I was hosting a private training session in my backyard, just a few former trainees brushing up on breaching techniques and tactical assessments. The gate opened, and in walked someone unexpected, one of the teenagers from Karen's patrol. The lanky one, with the walkie-talkie and oversized sunglasses. He looked nervous. I didn't know," he said quietly. "About you, about any of it. I just thought it would be cool, doing security stuff, but that was messed up. I didn't mean to break in." I nodded slowly, letting him sweat for a moment. Then, I asked, "You want to learn how to actually do this kind of work the right way?" His eyes lit up. "Really?" "Sure," I said. "But first, you're going to do some reading. Then you're going to help me fix my fence. Your crew bent one of the hinges." He nodded quickly, practically saluting. It felt poetic, the same kid who had tried to sneak through my house like a dollar store spy, now hauling tools to repair the damage. By the time the sun went down, I had neighbors waving as they passed by, a burger on the grill, and a tentative sense of peace restored. Karen's windows remained shut, her blinds drawn. Her car hadn't moved in days. Whether she was still plotting or simply packing up, I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't care. She'd come into my home thinking she was untouchable, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. I trained the people who handle threats far worse than clipboard-wielding dictators. And Karen had learned the hard way that when you break down the wrong door, sometimes the door fights back. The following week, Karen's house went dark. The curtains that had once fluttered in a perfectly timed routine, like she was signaling some kind of suburban Morse code, stayed drawn 24 hours a day. Her plastic lawn decorations, those little patriotic gnomes holding mini clipboards, were gone. The HOA-issued street newsletter, which she usually delivered with smug little notes like, "You're welcome for the oversight," showed up late, and this time, there was no signature. People started saying she might be leaving town. Others thought she was just laying low. But one thing was clear, Karen had finally been knocked off her throne. The neighborhood had never felt lighter. The city's legal wheels didn't move quickly, but they did move. Thanks to the overwhelming evidence and formal complaints from more than a dozen residents, the district attorney's office announced that a public hearing was scheduled, not a criminal trial yet, but a full civic investigation into the misuse of authority, impersonation of public officials, and unlawful entry into private property. The entire community buzzed like a beehive. Everyone wanted to attend. Everyone wanted to see Karen try to explain to a real judge why she thought her made-up safety force had the right to invade someone's home as if they were shooting a low-budget spy thriller. The hearing was held at the downtown Civic Center. It was open to the public, and they had to move it to a larger room after more than 60 people from our neighborhood RSVP'd. The vibe was a mix of courtroom drama and a family reunion, people in polos, sun hats, and even a few wearing t-shirts that read, "HOA Hands Off America." That last one made me laugh. Karen showed up last, dressed in a power suit about 3 sizes too bold for the occasion, flanked by a lawyer who looked like he regretted every life choice that had led him to this point. He had the look of someone who'd expected a boring civil dispute and had instead walked straight into a political minefield. When it was my turn to testify, I didn't dramatize. There was no need. I laid out the facts, how I had received a motion alert, arrived to find my house illegally entered, provided video and audio recordings, and identified the suspects. I didn't embellish her behavior. Her own words and actions did all the work. I ended my statement with something that seemed to hit the room harder than anything else. I've trained law enforcement officers across 5 states on how to enter a building safely, lawfully, and respectfully. Karen did none of those things. She's not a safety officer. She's a threat pretending to be one. The room fell silent. Karen's attorney tried to paint the whole thing as a misunderstanding, an overzealous attempt at community safety. He even suggested that Karen had felt endangered by some strange activities on my property. The moment he said that, Judith stood up from the audience and called out, "You mean the CPR training for first responders?" A few people snickered, the judge banged the gavel, but the point had been made. The final ruling didn't surprise anyone. Karen was found in violation of multiple civic codes, impersonation of an authority figure, unlawful entry, and harassment through unauthorized surveillance. She was fined heavily, not just for the break-in, but for her entire fake security operation. She was barred from holding any HOA office for the next 10 years, required to take a community ethics course, and ordered to make a public apology at the next HOA meeting. It wasn't jail time, but it was the kind of punishment that cut her ego and her sense of control right where it hurt. Back in the neighborhood, that ruling felt like a celebration. People hosted a barbecue on the green belt, someone brought a piñata shaped like a clipboard, and there was laughter, music, and a sense that we had all survived something together. Mr. Watson brought a cooler full of soda and handed out tiny "Neighborhood Peacekeeper" stickers to the kids, joking that they had more authority than Karen ever did. As for me, I kept it simple. I added an extra lock to the shed, updated the motion sensors, and sent thank you messages to every officer who helped shut the whole thing down. I declined the HOA's offer to chair the security committee. I didn't need a title to keep things safe. And honestly, I preferred being the quiet guy people nodded to as they passed by, the one who handled business without turning it into a circus. A week later, something unexpected happened. Karen showed up at my front door. Alone. No clipboard. No sunglasses. No teenage patrol. Just her, holding an envelope in one hand and looking as if she'd swallowed something bitter. She didn't ask to come in or pretend to be friendly. She just held out the envelope. "I was told to deliver this," she said. I took the envelope and nodded. She stood there for a moment longer, as if she wanted to say something else, maybe to defend herself, maybe to explain. But then, without a word, she turned and walked back to her car. No eye contact. No farewell. Just silence. Inside the envelope she handed me was a typed letter, clearly crafted by her lawyer. It was clinical, vague, and filled with euphemisms, words like unfortunate choices, misguided initiatives, and unintended consequences. But in the margins, scribbled in her handwriting, were 3 words: "I was wrong." Those words hit harder than anything in the letter. That was the closure I needed. That was the acknowledgement that truly ended it for me. The final twist came later that month when the HOA approved a new initiative, hiring an actual licensed security consultant to review the neighborhood safety policies. I didn't apply for the position, but the board reached out, asking for my advice. They weren't offering a full-time role, just some guidance, to help them set up legitimate safety practices and community-friendly procedures. I agreed, but only on one condition: no more plastic badges, no more fake patrols, and absolutely no more Karens. Most evenings now, I sit on my porch with a glass of iced tea, watching kids ride their bikes and dogs chasing squirrels. The neighborhood feels different, calm, grounded, like it finally remembered what it was meant to be, a community, not a dictatorship that enforces shrub height limits. People stop by to say hello, ask for advice, or thank me for what I did. I don't correct them when they call me the guy who stopped Karen. In my mind, though, I know I just did what anyone with the right training and a spine would have done. I defended my home, protected my rights, and showed a bully the exit door, no battering ram needed. Sometimes, when the sun sets just right, I catch sight of Judith, the new HOA chair, standing tall with her notebook in hand. She listens, doesn't lecture. No megaphones. No drama. Just calm, steady leadership. The HOA security patrol once barged into my house, thinking they were heroes on a mission. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They didn't know I trained real heroes. And now, they never will forget it.